Hey y'all, I'm Rob from the Mini Guitar Society, and I am living in the Coda. There's a musical term to describe the end of a piece. Once the song has resolved, well, most of the good ones are usually a mix of tension and relief, a dance between conflict and resolution. And at the end, at least with a lot of music, there is this resolve. There is an end point. And when I was young, when I was first starting out to try to write songs, I thought that was the goal. You know, just like in life. The goal is the end. Well, a couple of years ago, I was sitting in a hospital bed in a local hospital, and a doctor looked at me, looked down at my chart, and then looked up at me and said, "I can't figure out why you're not dead or in a coma." And of course, me being me, I made a joke. I knew that he was serious, but I knew something that he didn't. Just being there, just having my doctor tell me to go to the emergency room and tell them that I was having a blood sugar emergency gave me a flash of clarity. See, I realized that my son was old enough to now remember most of the lessons that I tried to teach. I knew that he was old enough that someone else could take care of him for a couple of years and that he was going to be okay. I realized that I had preached enough that people knew what I was trying to say and that what happens to me doesn't matter. I'd earned my degree, I'd earned my spot, I'd traveled, I'd stayed home, I'd read, I'd sung, I'd played. I hit that point where I realized if I ever won the lottery, I'd just do more of what I was doing. It wouldn't change my life entirely. I can't figure out why you're not dead or in a coma. I laughed. In a way, I had reached the end. So I went to the Coda. Because I wasn't done. I wasn't dead. I wasn't in a coma. I was making jokes with a very concerned doctor that thought I wasn't taking things seriously, but I had already made some decisions. I knew that things were going to be different, and not just talking about my health. I was talking about a change in my attitude. Because all of a sudden it became very clear. I had my vocation, a calling, a purpose. I had my family. I had a son that I loved. And I had more health than I had any right to. Because while others treat their bodies like a temple, I had treated mine like an amusement park. I had my sanity, or at least as close as I'll ever get to it, which had been in a question for a decade or more prior to that moment. And I still had my sense of humor, obviously, although the doctor didn't appreciate it. And I was still, despite the doctor's protestations, very much alive and awake. And not just alive and awake in a physical sense, but I was alive and awake in a way that would leave me free to live. In that hospital bed, I became free from the weight of ambition, free from the bonds of impression, free from the fear of uncertainty, free from the terror of failure. And I realized I didn't need to run a marathon or climb Mount Everest. I didn't need to make it because the part of my life that I loved had already been made. The majority of my song had already been sung. And now it was time to go to the Coda. I could revisit all of the things that I love. I could do those things again. I could also find new things to love along the same themes without having to reinvent myself. Just combining the different selves that I'd lived through my life, just renewing and reforming what was already there. I was free. Most of all, I was free from myself and free to be myself. And suddenly in the middle of that hospital, there was quiet. Not just in the hospital room, but in my heart and in my mind. And I exhaled and realized this must be that peace that I've been preaching about all these years. For only an instant, there was a hanging breath in the score between the end and the coda. And then the downbeat of the coda, up-tempo, more lively, full of orchestration. There are always phrases that will be present from before, always ghost notes that linger from the first few verses, but somehow the coda is more memorable. And strangely enough, at the beginning of the coda, someone came along that was intrigued by the idea of adding to life without taking anything away. With newness, but without discarding the past. With singing, with dancing, with playing. And here's the funny thing. The joy didn't come from finding someone. The someone came after I found the joy. I'm Rob from the Miniguitarsociety, and I am happily living in the Coda.